With the future of gaming looking stronger on PC than ever, PlayStation could be in a bit of trouble. Let's chat about it down below, but first, my opinion. I'm Tarmack, and this is Feature Creep. I know it's probably a controversial thing to say given how obviously Sony has trounced Microsoft in the current console generation. When I last looked, Microsoft had been estimated to have sold around 20 million Xbox One consoles and Sony over 40 million PS4s. Solid 2-to-1 ratio certainly indicates a console generation winner, doesn't it? Well, what if I told you that I think Sony is in real trouble unless they come up with something other than VR to stand behind? Sony did a great press event at E3. It was game after game after game after game. The only non-game that was talked about briefly was the PlayStation VR headset, and unfortunately, despite leaks, we didn't get to see anything official about the PlayStation Neo, that being the new upgraded version of the PlayStation 4. There were a ton of good games they showed. Last Guardian, God of War 4, all kinds of stuff. Microsoft, on the other hand, ran a very different conference. True, we did see more games and less sports than usual, but we also saw the Xbox One Slim, custom controllers, and of course the Project Scorpio reveal. It was less about the games and more about how Xbox is still this all-encompassing thing, just in a slightly different way now. I've accused Microsoft in the past of building up walls with their Universal Windows Platform app structure, and to a point I still believe that. However, with their E3 presentation and a few interviews that I've happened on after the fact, there does seem to be a shift occurring. I still feel that UWP has some seriously bad potential. However, I've wanted to talk about this aspect of the Microsoft E3 presentation since they slapped me in the face with it at every reveal during the event. For those that watched the press event, this phrase will sound awfully familiar. Xbox One and Windows 10 exclusive. It was only last year at E3 2015 where Microsoft essentially continued to pretend that PC didn't exist. Exclusive at that E3 set of press events was very vocal about the console exclusivity, but it was clear that when they said exclusive, that simply meant not on the other console. PC ended up getting a lot of those titles. The single most interesting thing to me about E3 2016 is that Microsoft essentially claimed ownership of the PC gaming market, all while Sony continued to ignore it. Every game Microsoft talked about had that Xbox One and Windows 10 exclusive phrased branding, and while it got very tiresome very quickly to keep hearing everything like that, the message continued to intrigue me for days afterwards. Here's the public secret about consoles and why Microsoft and Sony focus so much time and effort on them. For every product you sell, the person who makes the product gets a chunk of money, but so does the person who sells that product. If you make a game on PC and sell it on Steam, you get some money and Valve gets some money. The consoles are different. If you want to make a game on the Xbox One or the PlayStation 4, that's fine. You can sell your game at Best Buy or whatever the case. You get some money. Best Buy gets some money. But so does Microsoft or Sony, depending on which platform we're talking about. They get a cut of every new game sold in the form of a licensing fee for producing content on a closed platform. So is it any wonder why they would avoid PC? There's no way to enforce that kind of license fee unless you self-publish everything. You don't get a cut of the action of every PC game sold on every different platform available to sell unless it is you doing the selling. It is seen as a competitor for that reason, and it's also very likely the reason why we see deeper discounts on PC because there are fewer chefs in the kitchen. Microsoft has something that Sony does not, and I think Sony should be very, very afraid. That something is Windows, and it has taken them quite a long time to figure out a way to use Windows to their advantage in the video game space. I spoke about the end of console generations, and hearing Phil Spencer make not one but two references to the phrase beyond generations during the Scorpio reveal is just further cementing my prediction that we're done with traditional generational design. They don't need it any longer. Well, at least Microsoft doesn't. Microsoft has constructed a gaming platform that works both on Xbox One and on Windows 10, with very few modifications required by developers to support both sets of systems. At least few modifications when compared to traditional porting. That is huge, folks! And to make matters even more scary for Sony, we're going to be seeing at the very least first-party titles and probably expanding to all Xbox One library games, where if you buy it for console, you can download it through the Windows 10 store or vice versa without buying it a second time. Now, I just recently upgraded to Windows 10. I was worried because I have a lot of very particular software and some very particular hardware in my workflow for YouTube video production. Not a single problem. No driver incompatibility, no programs crashing, no confusion on where or how to find functions of the OS. It's a good OS, spyware aside. Over time, the customer fear of change will go away and Windows 10 will become the major share operating system. This is what I'm talking about when I criticize game development for only handing customers negatives dressed up as positives, and where I claim that companies can be doing more for their end consumer. Microsoft has some restrictions in how UWP operates, and yes, while some of their titles will be sold on Steam, their store will still have first-party exclusives, according to Phil Spencer. But in exchange for having to use a new store and having to upgrade to Windows 10, gamers get two platforms that previously didn't talk to each other, where you no longer will need to buy those games twice if you want to play on both. That's a big change, and it's one that Sony simply doesn't have access to. Here's the crux of what I'm talking about. For Sony to do the same thing that Microsoft is doing would require a third-party application. Sony would need to develop a program structure, what is in essence an emulator, or modify the PlayStation architecture enough so that easy porting to PC is as simple as the UWP porting. They would need to abandon the console exclusivity and give PC gamers a bit of consideration. And they need to start paying attention in a real hurry because yes, right now they have a 2-to-1 ratio of consoles sold, but as soon as PC users start getting entered into the mix, that lead starts to look shallow and possibly non-existent. Steam concurrent users, meaning the number of people logged on at any one time, peaked at around 6 million users in 2012. That 6 million concurrent user peak is now around 12 million accounts logged in at the peak time of day every day. That's 12 million people who simply have Steam running all at the same time, and a pretty stark doubling in only 4 years. From there, we're looking at peaks of over 3 million people in-game. I've never seen any attempt from either console manufacturer to show those kinds of numbers. The estimates about a year ago pegged the Steam user base at 125 million active accounts. Even going ham on that number and cutting it in half, pretending that there are that many bot accounts, it's crazy! And that doesn't account for Uplay, Origin, GOG, or anything else. According to market research firm Newzoo, the PC gaming market for 2015 and 2016 is pretty close to the size of the entire console gaming market combined, including PS4, Xbox One, Wii U, and all previous generations for revenue. That's nothing to shake a stick at. If Microsoft can tap into that consumer market by holding out this carrot on a stick that is cross-platform game compatibility via Windows 10, they are setting themselves up to absolutely trounce Sony in very short order. Sony took the stance of trying to push VR via the Morpheus project, but if Microsoft is just shooting for PC compatibility and pushing Scorpio, a higher spec console, which is really just a pre-built PC at this point, then they don't even need their own VR because both the Rift and the Vive exist and already run on PC. I'm a PC-focused gamer, though not because I dislike consoles or anything along those lines. I just chose to spend a bunch of money on a PC and prefer mouse and keyboard. I have a PlayStation 4 and a Wii U. The PS4 gets more play than the Wii U, but both pale in comparison to my PC time. So obviously I've got what would be considered by many to be a bias here. I want more focus on the PC because that's where I spend most of my gaming time. And I think that this is one of the biggest capitulations on the part of big corporate gaming that we've had to date. PC gamers went from being ignored by all three console manufacturers to being not just acknowledged by one of them, but being included as just another part of their overall gaming market strategy. That's a good change, and I'd like to see both Sony and Nintendo take up that torch. The issue, unfortunately, is that I'm not sure either Sony or Nintendo has the capability of making it happen. Microsoft has an operating system monopoly where they can leverage in-engine changes, and neither of the other two can do that. So, for the time being, I think it's a pretty safe bet that both Sony, and to a lesser extent Nintendo, because in my opinion, outside of the handheld market, they're one hardware announcement away from being forced to just make games and not consoles, kind of like Sega did. I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that they both could be in trouble. Given my focus on PC gaming, I assume that most of the viewers who watch my videos are at least, if not predominantly, PC gamers. So, given that assumption, where do you see the benefits and pitfalls for the rather overt new direction Microsoft is taking? Obviously, it's not all lollipops and rainbows. They could massively screw this up. It's got strong potential at the very least, in my opinion. Let's chat about it down below. Feature Creep is a regular show, so sub up if you liked it, or you can complain about how I mentioned you should subscribe and say that because of this, you'll never watch anything on the channel again, because that's the mature, reasonable response to someone self-promoting on their own content. Either way, that's all I have to say. Tarmack out.